The night was cold, and the streets were empty except for the distant sound of passing cars. In the shadows of an old alley, a young woman stood trembling, holding a small bundle close to her chest. She looked around, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. She knew what she was about to do, and it broke her heart. But in her mind, she had no choice. Inside the soft, worn-out blanket were two tiny babies, twins, barely a few hours old, their little hands curled into fists, their faces peaceful as they slept, unaware of the world around them. The woman, Maria, had carried them for 9 months, feeling their kicks, dreaming of a future where she could hold them with joy. But reality had crushed those dreams. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm sorry," her voice shaking. She placed the babies gently on the ground near a dumpster, making sure they were wrapped tightly to keep them warm. The sound of their faint breathing filled the silence of the night. She hesitated, her fingers lingering on the soft fabric, her heart screaming at her to stop. But fear won. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and turned away. Her feet felt like they were made of stone as she forced herself to walk away, her mind filled with pain and guilt. Each step felt heavier than the last. She wanted to run back, to pick them up, to hold them close, and never let go. But she kept walking, disappearing into the night, leaving behind the two most precious pieces of her heart. For a while, there was only silence. The twins lay still, the alley dark and quiet except for the distant honking of a car. Then one of the babies stirred. A tiny whimper escaped his lips, then another. His little body shivered in the cold air. His brother soon joined in, their cries growing louder, echoing through the empty streets. Most people were asleep, unaware of the heartbreaking scene unfolding in the shadows. But one man heard the cries. Marcus, a homeless man who often stayed near the alley, woke up from his spot near the dumpster. At first he thought it was just a cat or a dog. But as the cries grew louder, something inside him told him to check. Pulling his thin coat around himself, he stood up and walked toward the sound. When he reached the dumpster, he froze. His eyes widened in shock. Right in front of him, wrapped in a blanket, were two tiny babies, their faces red as they cried in the cold night air. His heart pounded. He looked around, searching for someone, anyone who might have left them there. But the street was empty. The mother was long gone. Marcus swallowed hard, his rough hands shaking as he bent down and gently picked up the bundle. "Who could leave you here like this?" he whispered, his voice full of emotion. The babies kept crying, their little bodies seeking warmth. Without thinking twice, Marcus held them close, his own body shivering from the cold. He didn't have much, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave them here. With a determined look in his eyes, he turned and started walking, not knowing that this one decision was about to change all their lives forever. Marcus held the babies close to his chest, trying to keep them warm. Their tiny bodies shivered in the cold night air, their cries breaking the silence of the empty street. He had seen many things in his life, hard times, loneliness, and struggle, but never had he come across something like this. Two helpless newborns, left alone with no one to care for them. His heart ached as he looked down at their small faces. Their little hands moved slightly, searching for warmth, for comfort. Marcus tightened his grip, shielding them as best as he could. He didn't know who had left them there or why, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just walk away. His own life had been tough. He had made mistakes in the past, choices he wasn't proud of. But tonight, standing in that dark alley, holding those innocent children, he felt something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time, a purpose. Without wasting another second, he started walking. His legs were tired, his body weak from hunger, but none of that mattered now. The babies needed help, and he had to get them to safety. As he reached the main road, he looked around, searching for someone who could help. The streets were mostly empty, but in the distance, he saw the bright lights of a small convenience store. He hurried toward it, his heart racing. As soon as he stepped inside, the warmth of the store hit him. The cashier, a young woman named Lisa, looked up from her counter, surprised to see Marcus carrying a bundle so carefully. She had seen him around before, sometimes buying small things when he had money, but tonight there was something different about him. "Marcus," she asked, frowning. "What's that?" Marcus walked straight to the counter and carefully unwrapped the blanket, revealing the two newborns inside. Lisa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I found them," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "Near the dumpster. Someone left them there." For a moment, Lisa just stared in shock. Then she sprang into action. She grabbed her phone and quickly dialed emergency services. "We need help," she said urgently. "There are 2 abandoned babies here. They need medical attention." Marcus looked down at the twins, his heart pounding. Their cries had softened, as if they knew help was near. Minutes felt like hours as they waited. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air. An ambulance pulled up, and paramedics rushed inside. They carefully took the babies from Marcus's arms, checking their tiny bodies for any signs of harm. "They're cold, but they'll be okay," one of the paramedics said reassuringly. Marcus let out a deep breath, relief washing over him. As the babies were placed into the ambulance, Lisa turned to him. "You saved them," she said softly. Marcus looked at the twins one last time before the doors of the ambulance closed. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: his life, and theirs, had just changed forever. The next morning, the entire town was talking about the shocking discovery of the newborn twins. The news spread like wildfire. 2 tiny babies, left alone in the cold, saved by an unexpected hero. At the hospital, doctors and nurses worked carefully to check the twins. They were weak and cold, but otherwise healthy. The staff couldn't believe that they had survived the night. Everyone who heard about them felt a mix of sadness and anger. How could someone leave innocent children like this? And who was the mother? Meanwhile, Marcus sat in the hospital waiting area, his hands clasped together, his mind racing. He had spent the whole night thinking about the babies. Even though he had only held them for a short time, he already felt connected to them. He had saved their lives. But now he had no idea what would happen next. A police officer soon arrived to ask him questions. Marcus was nervous. He had a past, one he wasn't proud of. Would they think he was involved? He swallowed hard as the officer approached him. "Sir, we appreciate what you did," the officer said, his tone serious but kind. "Can you tell us exactly what happened?" Marcus took a deep breath and explained everything. How he had heard the cries, how he had found the babies near the dumpster, and how he had rushed to get help. He told the truth, every single detail. The officer nodded. "We're investigating the case now. If you hear or remember anything else, let us know." Marcus exhaled in relief. They believed him. Meanwhile, the hospital staff couldn't stop talking about Marcus. Many of them had seen him before, wandering the streets, struggling to survive. But today, they saw him differently. Today, he wasn't just a homeless man. He was a hero. As the sun rose higher, news reporters gathered outside the hospital. Cameras flashed, and journalists spoke into microphones. The story was now everywhere. People all over the city were talking about the twins and the mysterious mother who had left them behind. The public reaction was strong. Some were heartbroken, imagining the fear and pain the mother must have felt to make such a choice. Others were furious, demanding justice. The police received dozens of calls from people claiming to have seen something or heard rumors about who the mother might be. Inside the hospital, a nurse gently rocked one of the twins in her arms. "They're so beautiful," she whispered to another nurse. "I hope they find a loving home." Little did she know, outside in the waiting area, Marcus was having a thought that surprised even himself. He had nothing. Not a house, not a job, not a family. But for the first time, in a long time, he had a purpose. As he sat in that chair, Looking through the glass window at the babies he had saved, a bold idea formed in his mind. Could he be the one to take care of them? Could he give them a home, even when he had none himself? He didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was certain. His journey with these babies was far from over. Marcus sat outside the hospital room, his mind full of thoughts. The past 24 hours had changed his life in ways he never imagined. He had gone from being a man with nothing to a man who had saved 2 innocent lives. But what now? He knew the hospital couldn't keep the twins forever. Soon, social workers would step in, and the babies would be placed in foster care. The thought made his heart ache. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the nurses had grown attached to the twins. They cared for them with love, making sure they were fed and kept warm. But every time they held the babies, they wondered the same thing. What would happen to them next? Would they find a loving home, or would they be lost in the system like so many others? The police continued their search for the mother. They checked security cameras, questioned people in the neighborhood, and followed every lead. But finding her wasn't easy. Whoever she was, she had disappeared without a trace. At the same time, something unexpected was happening outside the hospital. People in the community were coming forward, offering to help. Some wanted to donate clothes, baby formula, and blankets. Others asked if they could foster or adopt the twins. The story had touched the hearts of many, and everyone wanted to be part of something good. Marcus watched all of this unfold, feeling the deep sense of responsibility. He couldn't explain it, but he felt connected to the babies in a way he never had with anyone before. He had spent years alone, struggling to survive, feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. But now, for the first time, he wanted something more. He wanted to be there for these children. Taking a deep breath, he made a decision. He walked up to a social worker who had just arrived at the hospital. She was a kind-looking woman with glasses and a warm smile. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly. "I want to know, is there any way I can take care of the babies?" The social worker looked surprised. "You mean foster them?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, or adopt them. I know I don't have much, but I'll do whatever it takes." The woman studied him carefully. "That's a big responsibility. Do you have a stable home? A job?" Marcus hesitated. "Not yet, but I can find one. I can change. I don't want them to grow up feeling abandoned." The social worker sighed. "I admire your heart, Marcus. But these things take time. We have to make sure the babies go to the best possible home." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. He had expected this answer, but it still hurt. He wasn't ready yet, but he would be. He promised himself that no matter what, he wouldn't walk away from these babies. He would find a way to be in their lives. As he left the hospital that day, he knew one thing for sure. His journey was just beginning. Days passed, and the search for the twins' mother continued. The police followed every lead, checking hospitals, shelters, and security footage from nearby streets. People in the community kept talking about the abandoned babies, and everyone had the same question: who was their mother, and why did she leave them? Then one afternoon, a breakthrough happened. A security camera from a building near the alley had captured a blurry figure walking toward the dumpster that night. The image wasn't clear, but the police could tell it was a young woman. She had covered her head with a hoodie, but something about her posture, her hesitation, the way she kept looking around, suggested she was in distress. The police showed the image to people in the neighborhood, hoping someone would recognize her. It didn't take long before they got a name: Maria. She was a young woman who had lived in the area, but had disappeared days before the babies were found. Some people remembered seeing her pregnant, but no one knew what had happened to her after she gave birth. With this new information, the police intensified their search. They checked shelters and food pantries, knowing she might be struggling to survive. Finally, after days of searching, they found her. Maria was sitting on a park bench, staring at the ground. She looked tired, her clothes worn, her face pale. When the officers approached her, she didn't try to run. She just looked up at them with tired eyes, as if she had been expecting this moment. "Maria," one officer said gently, "we need to talk." She nodded slowly, her fingers trembling. They took her to the station, where she sat in a small room, her hands clasped together. A kind-looking female officer sat across from her and spoke softly. "Maria, we know what happened," she said. "We know you left your babies. Can you tell us why?" Maria's lips quivered, and tears filled her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, in a shaky voice, she whispered, "I didn't want to leave them, but I was scared." She told them everything. She had been in a difficult situation, alone and afraid. She had no family, no support, and no money. The father of the babies had left as soon as he found out she was pregnant. She had nowhere to go, no food, no help. "I thought if I left them somewhere safe, someone kind would find them," she sobbed. "I didn't want them to suffer with me." The officer listened carefully, her expression softening. Maria wasn't a bad person. She was a mother who had made a heartbreaking decision out of fear and desperation. "We're going to help you," the officer said. "But first, you need to tell us. Do you want your babies back?" Maria's tears fell harder as she whispered, "More than anything." Little did she know, her journey was just beginning. Maria sat in the small room, her hands shaking as she wiped her tears. She had never imagined this moment, being found, being questioned. But now there was only one thing on her mind: her babies. Were they safe? Had they been taken care of? The officer sitting across from her gave a small, reassuring smile. "Your babies are safe, Maria. They're at the hospital, healthy and being looked after." Maria let out a breath she didn't even realize she was holding. She closed her eyes, relief washing over her. But at the same time, guilt sat heavy in her heart. She had left them. What if no one had found them in time? What if something had happened to them? The officer leaned forward gently. "We understand that you were scared, but abandoning children is serious. We need to know, why didn't you ask for help?" Maria bit her lip. "I didn't think anyone would help me," she whispered. "I had no home, no money. I was alone. I thought, maybe someone else could give them a better life." The officer nodded. "I understand. But there are people who could have helped. You didn't have to do this alone." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes again. "I know," she said softly. "I regret it every second." After a long conversation, the officers decided that Maria needed help, not punishment. She wasn't a criminal. She was a desperate mother who had made a mistake. They called a social worker to see if Maria could be reunited with her babies, but things wouldn't be easy. She had no job, no stable home, and no way to provide for them yet. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Marcus was sitting near the babies, watching them sleep in their little cribs. He had been visiting them every day, checking on them, making sure they were okay. The nurses smiled whenever they saw him. They could tell he cared deeply for the twins. When a nurse walked in, she gave him a gentle look. "Marcus, I have some news." His heart pounded. "What is it?" They found the mother. For a moment, Marcus didn't say anything. He had imagined many possibilities, someone who had abandoned them without a second thought. But now, hearing that she had been found, he wasn't sure how to feel. "She wants them back," the nurse continued. "She regrets leaving them and wants another chance." Marcus swallowed hard. He should have felt relieved, happy that their mother wanted them. But deep down, he felt something else, something he didn't expect. A fear of losing them. He had only known the twins for a short time, but they had already become a part of him. He had been dreaming of a future where he could raise them, give them the love they deserved. But now, their real mother was back. And that changed everything. Marcus sat in a hospital chair, staring at the tiny twins as they slept peacefully in their cribs. His heart felt heavy. He had spent days worrying about their future, wondering if he could be the one to take care of them. But now, everything had changed. Their mother had been found. She wanted them back. He should have felt happy, But instead, he felt uncertain. A part of him had already started seeing them as his own. He had pictured holding their hands as they took their first steps, hearing their laughter, and watching them grow. But now, all of that felt like a dream slipping away. A social worker entered the room, breaking his thoughts. She gave him a small smile. "Marcus, Maria is at the station. She wants to see her babies." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Is she ready to take care of them?" The social worker sighed. "Not yet. She wants to, but she has no job, no home. She needs support before she can take them back." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. "So what happens now?" "For now, the twins will stay in temporary care while Maria gets help," the social worker explained. "She's been offered a place in a shelter, and we'll help her find a job. But it will take time." Marcus hesitated before asking the question that had been on his mind. "Can I help?" The social worker looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I know I don't have much, but I want to be in their lives. I don't want them to feel abandoned again. Can I foster them? Or at least help take care of them until Maria is ready?" The social worker studied him carefully. "Marcus, fostering is a big responsibility. Do you have a stable place to live?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but I'm trying. I've been looking for jobs. I want to change my life, not just for me, but for them." The social worker's expression softened. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. "That's admirable, Marcus, but you'll need to prove you can provide for them before you can foster." Marcus nodded. He wasn't giving up. Meanwhile, at the police station, Maria sat anxiously, waiting to see her babies. She had thought she had lost them forever, but now she had hope. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but she was ready to fight for a second chance. The next day, Maria was brought to the hospital under supervision. As she walked into the nursery, her eyes filled with tears when she saw her babies. She reached out with shaky hands, gently touching their tiny fingers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I love you so much." From the doorway, Marcus watched. His heart ached, but he knew one thing. He would do whatever it took to make sure these babies were safe, loved, and never abandoned again. The final chapter of their journey was about to begin. Maria stood by the hospital crib, tears streaming down her face as she gently touched her baby's tiny hands. They were so small, so fragile, yet so full of life. She had feared she would never see them again. But now, here they were, safe, warm, and cared for. A nurse stood beside her, watching with kind eyes. "They've been doing well," she said softly. "They've had a lot of love here." Maria nodded, but guilt still weighed on her heart. "I should have been the one taking care of them," she whispered. "I made a terrible mistake." The nurse placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were scared, Maria. But what matters is what you do now." Maria turned to the social worker standing nearby. "I want them back," she said firmly. "I will do whatever it takes." The social worker sighed. "It's not that simple, Maria. You need a stable home, a job, and the ability to provide for them. Right now, you don't have those things." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. "But I love them." "I know," the social worker said gently. "And that's why we want to help you." Meanwhile, Marcus stood outside the room, listening. He had been thinking about this moment for days. He wanted to be in the twins' lives, but he also knew their mother deserved a chance. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. Maria turned, surprised to see him. She recognized him from the news. The man who had saved her babies. "You're Marcus," she said softly. He nodded. "Yeah, I found them that night." She wiped her tears. "Thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." Marcus hesitated, then spoke. "I know what it feels like to struggle. I've been alone too. I get why you were scared." Maria looked down, ashamed. I didn't want them to suffer like I did." "I understand," Marcus said. "But they need you, and you need them." Maria nodded slowly. I do, but I don't know how to fix my life. Marcus glanced at the social worker and then made a decision. What if we help each other? Maria looked at him, confused. I've been trying to change my life, get a job, find a home, Marcus explained. I wanted to foster the twins, but I know their place is with you. Still, I don't want to walk away. Maybe we can work together. We both want the same thing, to give them a good life. Maria stared at him for a moment, then slowly nodded. You'd really help me. Marcus smiled. Yeah, we don't have to do this alone. The social worker watched them both, realizing that something special was happening. Two people, both broken in their own way, coming together for the sake of these innocent children. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges ahead. But one thing was certain. The twins would never be alone again. Their journey was just beginning, but this time, they would face it together.